I'll flick over to James Jackson, President of New South Wales Farmers. James, if you could give us an overview from a farmer's perspective, why exploring beyond diesel is actually something we need to do.
Yeah, certainly happy to, John. Look, I'll just see if I can share my screen. I've got a couple of slides.
That's looking good, James. Oh, you've muted. That's better.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, fire away.
Okay, far away. Yes, it is interesting, Mike. We did some work, and AFI did some work benchmarking the cost of, the energy costs in Australia versus the OECD, the other countries that we compete with. And we've gone from the lowest quartile in energy costs to the highest quartile. There is an imperative, an efficiency and a resilience imperative as well. So yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this forum. It's something that's been occupying the New South Wales farmers, horizon for some time. I'm James Jackson, and I'm the president at the moment. I'm a sheep and cattle farmer from up in New England, and it is pretty cold here at the moment. The dog's water is usually frozen in the morning, so yes, and we are seeing that conversion from electricity to diesel with the very high cost of, the electricity at the moment. So yes, there is an increasing amount of, the ag sector actually converting to diesel with this reduced, the reduced cost of diesel relative to electricity at the moment. So diesel has become a critical part of the energy mix for agriculture. It's an essential power source for powering generators to operate a heap of plant and machinery. We've seen actually over the huge productivity boost, especially in that broadacre agriculture, and certainly agricultural logistics, the trucks, due to the machinery that is essentially principally powered by diesel. Although we've seen small inroads made in the energy mix with renewables such as ethanol and biodiesel, the majority of the energy mix still comes from that petroleum-based product. This actually has some obvious consequences for agriculture in the medium and indeed long term. Obviously, one of the imperatives, the planet does have a limited supply of oil from which conventional diesel is distilled. And although we've seen price hikes, drive innovation in new ways of using shales and alternative fossil feedstocks, these sources are always also limited. So it's relatively cheap at the moment, diesel, due to the demand collapse with the pandemic. But one could anticipate that with the industrialisation of, huge numbers of the world's population, that the competition for this diminishing resource will become more intense, thus feeding into the price and supply. It is interesting, one of my members, and this is probably just more an average than, an extraordinary bill, has got a fuel bill of over $400,000. Now, that's when he takes the tractors out of the shed. Of course, the last couple of years, the fuel bill's been a lot less because there's been no moisture imperative, if you like, to take it out of the shed. So, with the bills like this, there is a serious incentive for a lot of these big operators to look at some, bespoke on-farm sort of infrastructure to manage this this cost and look at innovative new ways to trim the bill, if you like. We've seen a collapse in the price of renewables, really bringing them into the mix. This combined with this diminishing supply and increased demand for the conventional reserves are actually combining to create an imperative for change. We need to manage the transition from diesel to renewables as the energy source for agricultural machinery. Government actually has a responsibility here to maintain or create some certainty about transition policy that incentivises the development of renewables and storage that is both affordable and accessible. Fuel security. What are all the imperatives? Well, one of the things that has come to light recently with this COVID pandemic is that the fragility, if you like, of some of our economy's supply chains. We've seen serious disruption to a lot of our markets due to sovereign nations actually intervening in supply chains to secure supplies of a critical resource. There's a lot of people questioning whether it's a good idea to actually rely on a single source of a product just because, for example, on a given day, the face mask is 2 cents a unit cheaper. This has actually refocused a lot of nations to examine what national security actually looks like and how one can assure supply. Our fuel supply chains, we don't have much of it, that heavy fuel oil in Australia. Our domestic reserves are fairly limited, and our fuel oil supply chains involve some particularly risky parts of the planet. We are exposed in terms of accessing this, and this recent event, if you like, has highlighted this. So that that fuel security issue is a compelling imperative to actually move to do something and to secure ways of managing that ploughing those paddocks and driving those rigs around the country in a fashion that can be funded by a different fuel source. So another imperative, of course, is saving the planet. The alternate fuels, have got a different carbon footprint, and certainly diesel has been implicated as one of the key issues with regard to agricultural's carbon footprint, if you like. Unlike recycled emissions from livestock, the emissions from using conventional diesel for broadacre ag and ag logistics is actually increasing the net atmospheric carbon loads, or contributing to the global warming potential of the ag sector or the ag footprint. Thus, managing conventional diesel emissions are a part of the real impact, if you like, of agriculture on meeting the national targets for Australia's obligations that certainly have been committed to under the Paris Agreement. There are obviously other contributors, but conventional fuel oil is a resource that agriculture needs to transition away from in the medium to long term if we are to achieve a low net carbon future. I use the term low net carbon deliberately. We have to acknowledge the natural life cycle of carbon. We are, after all, carbon-based life forms. Carbon actually is a brilliant element, if you like, to build, a carbon-based life form, because it can be built up and deconstructed. It's the ultimate recycler, if you like, as an element. So it's a useful molecule, and it's pretty dopey, demonising carbon just for the sake of carbon, because it's pretty clever, actually. What other imperatives are there? Well, there is a market risk, and, increasingly around the planet, and we are exposed, we're a big exporter of agricultural commodities. So the carbon footprint of our product in terms of the provenance of our product is actually another key consideration for moving on this. We're seeing, with increased traceability and increased demand by consumers to understand the provenance and understand the impact of their food that's on the supermarket shelf, they are far more focused on this provenance, and there is a premium if you tick the boxes on the provenance of food. So, you know, regardless of what philosophically what we think about carbon, or you know what we may think about carbon, you know, the market is always right, and you know, there's going to be an increasing, I would anticipate increasing scrutiny, if you like, of the carbon provenance of the foodstuffs. And if we can transition to alternate fuels like hydrogen, you know, some of the options that we're going to learn about from the technical guys today, you know, that's going to hold us in good stead in things like our FTAs with the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans are paranoid about, I know we've got a European on our panel today, but the Europeans are paranoid about anything. They want the provenance, you know, to the last detail, and they're willing to pay for it. They're willing to pay for it. So where there's a marketplace, you know, we've got to fill that demand and supply that provenance that people actually, our markets actually want. So those three imperatives, if you like, you know, fuel security, we've got you know, the carbon footprint and of agriculture, and indeed the marketing imperatives, you know, in terms of our provenance of our products. So there is a reason to do it. You know, we have recently had a lot of discussion around agri-politics about this carbon neutral 2050, you know, creating an economy that is carbon neutral by 2050. In typical farmer fashion, we're more sort of focused on outcomes in the ag sector rather than sort of virtue signalling about, you know, numbers and targets and dates. And I think we'll hear about some of those efforts today. You know, many of the steps on the journey actually can be of carbon neutrality, can actually be quite advantageous for ag. You know, there's soil carbon, there's this diesel piece, there's biodiversity, farm forestry. They've all got sort of potential to improve our provenance, improve our carbon footprint, but they've also got hidden traps. We have to be sure that the toolbox, if you like, for ag to navigate this brave new future, it's not going to kill the golden goose, or we're not going to actually create structures or architecture, you know, to embrace this, that's actually going to have perverse outcomes. Governments are great at creating structures that, you know, result in very poor outcomes at the end of the day. It'll take a lot of moving parts to do this deal. So we've certainly got to audit our exposure. We've sort of got to look at our capacity to respond and our ability economically to respond. And we've got to keep assessing those impediments. A critical part of this is going to actually be taking people on the journey together. You know, it has been a very fractured debate up till now, the carbon debate in this country. And I certainly think it's time that there's some healing that has to be done to reconnect a pretty polarised community as a whole, but certainly even the ag sector, I think, you know, there's a number of people, you know, have still got to be taken on a bit of a journey on this, and we've got to go on that journey together. So yes, that certainly we are trade exposed, and you know, a lot of our exports are going to demand this. This is an interesting slide of one of our members out at Young, I think she is, Edwina Beveridge. Now they're on biogas. I mean, they've just you know, this is a biogas facility with their piggery. You know, they're collecting it, generating some electricity. So in typical farmer fashion, just get on with it and do it. You know, the idea that nothing's happening in Australia is nonsense. I mean, there's thousands of acres of solar panels going on. People have got solar pumps everywhere, you know, like it is happening. It's turbocharged at the moment, what's happening in the ag sector. And unlike many sectors in the economy, actually, agriculture is well on the way to neutralising its net carbon footprint. We've got to remember that agriculture has been the single biggest contributor to the emissions reductions since 1990, primarily due to the vegetation legislation imposed on us, that's statutory theft. But the fact that farmers, the fact that our Australia's net carbon position has been achieved by farmers is actually not well known. And the inequitable approach has certainly damaged the trust of many farmers around this topic. However, we're still engaged in this issue by looking at these win-win opportunities that we're looking at today with issues like getting cheap local renewable electricity into the mix. When it comes to broadacre ag and logistics, that's why we've got you know, some interested farmers certainly on this webinar today. There's some exciting opportunities for agriculture, and various other people know more about hydrogen than me, but certainly it is very exciting, you know, to look at this possibility. Significant amount of research and development is currently underway into technologies to efficiently produce hydrogen, and maybe not long before it's an affordable option for use on farm. New South Wales Farmers actually has been engaged in the renewable discussion for quite a long time, and we certainly address all sorts of angles. There's opportunity in diversifying incomes, reducing costs, improving environmental credentials, and the list goes on. We also look at the risks and impediments. For instance, as with all developments, it's critical the planning system is adequate and fit for purpose to ensure the right development is in the right place. If we industrialise the ag landscape with thousands of hectares of panels on private ag land, we damage the potential of agriculture and also regional communities. That picture there with Dave Mailer, I mean, you're not going to have to use much diesel to plough that particular field, are you? So it's important to get these renewables in the right place. You know, and that requires some strategic planning from the government, which is sort of starting to happen. But you know, I think there's a bit of a journey to go on there, if you like. So land use conflicts are certainly a piece of work we're engaged in, but there is also huge opportunity for ag to be involved in this renewable future as well. And this has not escaped us. We've been very interested in actually microgrids, for instance, driving innovation and regional opportunity for both farm businesses and regional communities. The summer bushfires highlight the potential reliability issues of the central energy network during emergencies. And out of these events, we have a number of dairy farmers on the South Coast investigating exactly how they can enhance their energy self-sufficiency, but also the potential to provide energy to the local community. So essentially, you know, stop their milk bags from cooking, you know, when there's a blackout and having to throw the milk all down the gully as they had to do. Regulators certainly do have to open up the opportunity for farmers to be involved in the energy market, whether it's generation or using cheap midday power on farm to you know, create a bit of hydrogen or whatever. So that regulatory market or that regulatory space is still sort of archaic. I think it requires a piece of work. You know, the classic thing is you give a farmer a pair of pliers and a bit of wire and they can pretty much fix anything. And it is interesting. I was at a meeting in the Central West, and I was telling this, you know, on the pre-meeting for this, and anyhow, I made some flippant comment about an electric tractor and the extension cord that was necessary. And there was a bloke in at the meeting said, "Oh, you know, I built an electric tractor 20 years ago." It's true. I didn't believe it. And I looked at some of his colleagues, and they all sort of nodded. That's right. It's in the shed waiting for a battery. You know, so there's people been engaged in this space for a long time, and people have been thinking about this. And yeah, the wires and pliers thing, I think it's absolutely imperative. I mean, farmers can fix anything. And if you give us the regulatory sort of framework where we can embrace and sort of engage in the solutions, rather than impose them upon us, and create a marketplace that the ideas that sort of flourish, I think it can be very, very productive. There's, of course, a huge body of work going on in the global context in terms of developing new technologies, and we've got somebody from the Netherlands talking today. I'll be very interested to hear that one. How Australia agriculture fits into this global effort is another question, and it's interesting and challenging. And I don't think we should be trying to reinvent stuff that's happening elsewhere, but we certainly should be engaged in contextualising it and augmenting the research rather than that reinventing of it. And we'll certainly see some case studies of people putting stuff and some early adopters today. So we've been wading into this space for some time. With the plethora of technologies emerging, we'll see a lot of options and opportunities come and go, and we will see some redundant ideas, and there will be stranded ideas, stranded assets, and people will come to grief with some of their options. But I think this is the dynamic that drives us and gets us up in the morning, if you like. Those early adopters, I think it's very exciting, and I'm always interested to see those operations. So yeah, back to you, John. That's about all I've got. So I'll take some questions later on.
Great stuff. Thanks, James. And almost exactly on time. We didn't even have to give you the warning. Well done. Look, thanks for those insights. It's really good to sort of hear that New South Wales Farmers is keen to explore and discover and find new ways, because there's a whole pile of issues and problems and solutions all to be discovered. You did mention the sort of guy with the tractor in the shed waiting for the batteries. The man who knows about batteries is the next speaker.